Welcome to Bet Doctor, a special edition show on the proposed sale of Rosehill. We've had a little bit of a break off winter, and we'll get into a real racing show as of next week. But we thought with the lack of media coverage surrounding the proposed Rosehill sale and inquiry from last week, we thought we'd shine a bit of light on the subject. It's a very popular article on the media outlets that are covering it. But, it's quite worrying that there's just not much being said on both sides of the border, New South Wales and Victoria. But I'm joined in studio at the Gold Coast. John Walter's here with me.
G'day, Nick.
Now, we probably have some new audience here, so just a little bit of background about myself. My name's Scoot, aka Nick Heathcote. I'd probably describe myself now as a racing lifer. Stables, stud farms, been in bookmaking, Betfair, and now I run, I guess, a content, media, marketing / betting, tipping website called Little Birdie TV, and we're a pretty open-minded free channel. And the reason we started, I guess, this was to try and help punters along their journey. We know it's a tough game, and we also wanted just to cover off leave no stone unturned in terms of any topics or any racing politics. We wanted to add a little bit of element of that into our show, given, I guess, the changing landscape of the racing media environment. Walt, your background, bookmaker, jockey manager, punter, owner, and now you've got Racing Watch.
Yeah, I did the stables and the stud too. So, yeah, I'm a bit like yourself, bit caught the bug and been around the grounds, but settled sort of in this space, similar to you, like, and obviously come on the show with you most weeks, and it's basically because of what it is. Like everything that we're thinking about, we try to talk about, which is obviously doesn't get covered a lot of the time. So, that's the goal here, right?
Well, welcome Bren O'Brien into the show. He's a career journalist spanning about 20 years. Bren, how are you?
Yeah, it's great to be here, and it's nice to be able to sort of chat about these broader issues within the industry. And like you guys, I'm a lifelong passionate racing person. I spent probably the last 10 to 15 years working specifically in racing media across sort of a range of roles. Racing.com. I worked for punters.com.au for a while. I worked in a bloodstock publication for a fair while. So I've got a sort of reasonably broad understanding of the different aspects of the racing industry. I suppose if you talk about, I like to talk about them in three aspects because it suits our narrative at the straight. But, wagering, breeding / bloodstock, and the racing industry itself. And it's a complex industry. It's $1 billion industry. It deserves proper analysis, like any big industry. And one of the reasons why I started the straight, it was November last year when we launched, was that there was a lot of there wasn't a lot of proper coverage I felt around about some of these big issues within racing. I felt like mainstream media had begun to had ignored it largely to become sort of off their agenda, while racing media tends to be quite niche and often driven by parochial interests. I thought there was an opportunity there. I didn't think we were going to get the sort of 7 months that we've had in terms of racing politics and what's going on. It's been quite an extraordinary time. The Rosehill issue at the centre of that, but there is so many other things going on at the moment around wagering, around challenges in the breeding bloodstock game, around the racing industry stuff. So much stuff to write about at the moment. And it certainly kept us busy. And as I said, Rosehill is at the centrepiece of that.
Yeah, I think it's a good sign that, I probably spend 18 hours a day on the internet and sitting at my computer. And I reckon 9 out of 10 articles I read about racing probably come from you. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head where it comes to people like us, which is great and definitely wasn't being filled. So you're doing a great job, and we've never met. So, it's great to have you on, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's start to sink our teeth in it, because I think this story, the proposal of the Rosehill sale, is as big a watershed moment in racing. It's probably the last thing I can sort of remember was maybe equine influenza, which was on the cusp of bringing the industry to its knees or setting it back a long, long way. And racing managed to navigate itself through that. We've navigated ourselves through COVID as well. But as I said at the start of the show, I'm a little bit shocked that it hasn't got the media scrutiny or attention, or I'm waiting for some of the bigger publications to come out and make comment, which I guess I'm sort of directing that to sort of racing.com, but it's just not coming. But as Bren sort of has alluded to, he's filled the niche, and as I sort of said as well, we don't really hold any punches here at Little Birdie, so we're happy to pump up the the discussion here and get the ball rolling. And we've got some great guests lined up. We've got Robbie Waterhouse and Marc Lambourne as well. But let's get our teeth stuck into it now. Let's talk about the proposed sale of Rosehill. How did the sale, Bren, come to be, as you know?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I suppose we all heard about it publicly on December the 7th last year when Premier Chris Minns stood up alongside Peter Maguire and the ATC chairman and told us all this was an opportunity of a lifetime. It felt like the deal was done before we even knew about it, which I think surprised everyone. I mean, I like to think I've got my finger on the pulse on things. I didn't hear about it till the day before and only heard rumours. So it's trying to confirm that what was going on and where things were said. It was a very interesting time. What's evolved since and through, I guess, a bit of political scrutiny on this is that it actually did evolve really, really quickly. So if we're talking about dates, October 26th, the discussion was, let's look at Rosehill and the options to develop around Rosehill, retain the racecourse, and create a suburb and work with Metro West and whatever else. By October 30th, the discussion had turned to let's close, redevelop, and sell off Rosehill for a $5 billion deal. Now, this was all done. Now, the still plays part of this. This was all done 3 weeks before the full ATC board were informed about it, 2 weeks before Racing New South Wales said they knew anything about it. The timelines are probably what's caused a fair bit of intrigue around this from a political point of view. But obviously, since then, we've had a whole range of processes. And what has emerged is get back to the basic, right? It's an unsolicited proposal for the redevelopment of Rosehill. From a political point of view, that means the ATC has to go to the government with a proposal to say, government didn't bring this to us, we brought it to you. This is what the proposal's worth. And that process, was set to take about a year. It might take a bit longer now, given the political machinations. It's got through the first stage where the government said, yep, we're we're happy enough with what's going on so far. You go away, do your homework. We'll go away, do our homework. We'll come back together in a few months' time and work through the next stage. So that's where it sits. So that's beyond the broader challenge. Now, just to sort of make it perfectly clear, the ATC have said all along, this will go to a member vote. So the ATC members will get a vote. Now, why they didn't get a vote at the start and at the end, we don't know. But this is a really key part of the process that they've said that. However, it is worth noting that the government, the Cabinet Office, which advises the government, received advice back in November that they didn't necessarily need the approval of the ATC membership in order to get this across the line. The ATC board would be enough. Now, I'm not saying the ATC won't go to a member vote, but there is evidence there that they don't need to go to a member vote, which has cast a bit of a different colour on the whole debate.
From a legal point of view, it'll be interesting to get Robbie Waterhouse's take on that, whether that's correct from a point of law.
Well, it's whether they are willing to just try and enact some sort of parliamentary, like what do they call it, when they just decide to absorb. My sister had a petrol station very close by in Westmead there, and the government come along, said they want a light rail station and just absorbed it. So whether they try and do that,
that's compulsory
and sort
acquisition.
of overrule
Yep.
it. Yeah, compulsory if they enforce that.
Is the Clubs Act is it strong enough to ensure that the members have the say rather than the board, or can the board override them?
Well, I guess we just go back to what the government got the advice on, what the Cabinet Office got the advice on. The advice to the Cabinet Office, which was unveiled in the call for papers, the Standing Order 52, which came out a couple of months ago, which the New South Wales Parliament sort of came out with, indicated they got advice saying they didn't need to do it. Now, whether this will be tested in law or not, we don't know. The Clubs Act, as far as the ATC were concerned, seemed rock solid. They have to go to the members. But I guess this is the question, one of the many questions that need to be answered about this process, about where things sit.
$1 million question or $1 billion question, I would have thought. So which sides of government want what outcome at the moment? Obviously, Minns is for and wants the development.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly the Minns government, relatively early in its tenure, has sort of staked its reputation on this one. They wanted to meet housing targets. He came out and said, this is a great opportunity, 25,000 dwellings. It's a high density proposal on next to a proposed new rail line. It'd fit into all the political things. So from that perspective, that's fine. What has actually emerged from that, I suppose, is an interesting, I guess, the Liberal opposition have worked towards trying to find a way to find faults in the process and the way this was done. And that's part of it. And then we've got the broader political milieu, I suppose. You've got an unusual coalition across the crossbench where you've got people like from the Animal Justice Party and the Greens who have got an anti-racing agenda, but clearly see some political capital on this. And then you've got someone like Marc, who is a ATC member, a horse breeder, a fan of, but clearly does not like what Racing New South Wales do, and is not a fan of Peter Belandi. So it's sort of fascinating how that's all played out.
So Pandora's box.
Who opened the parliamentary inquiry? How did that come about?
So that was brought about by the crossbench came together to work that out. So that basically they voted, had a motion in Parliament in order to pass that in order to get there. So it was driven by the Liberal opposition, headed by Damien Tudor-Hope in the upper house. It's an upper house inquiry, just so you're aware. So and it was then supported by the crossbench. So they got enough numbers across the line. I think 28-18 might have been the final, or 21-18 might have been the final number, but that got it to a point where, okay, this goes to what's called a select committee, and the select committee has certain powers. Their powers are mainly around inquiry and investigation. They then provide, at the end of this inquiry, which we're seeing the start of now, a list of recommendations to the government. The government does not have to, got 3 months to reply, and they don't have to act on any of those recommendations, but they do have to provide a response to each of them. So, for example, if the inquiry came back and said, we advise greater probity on processes A, B, C, and D across the Rosehill proposal, the government could say, no, we're not going to do that because it doesn't fit. They don't have to do anything. But what it does, and what we've seen so far, it provides significant public scrutiny on what's going on.
And Racing New South Wales originally said they had nothing to do with the original proposal, but now they're funding the due diligence and everything going forward, and it's sort of their roles changed a bit.
Despite being, there's been some sort of survey conducted where only 13% of ATC members were pro the sales. So it's interesting that they're now funding this process, which will mount up and will be costly, when at the moment, if the vote was cast now and they actually ask the members what they want, it'd be a resounding no.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, obviously the ATC not in a position financially to see this through, because it's a costly process. Anyone who's planned for a house renovation knows how costly these processes are, let alone planning for a $5 billion suburb. So, this is a costly process, and Racing New South Wales have taken on some of that cost and some of that responsibility from the ATC to see this through. Racing New South Wales and Peter Belandi have said all the way through they were not involved in the genesis of this idea. However, they're now assisting the ATC in terms of exploring it.
There's something that doesn't quite add up there. It's interesting because racing's just come through, I guess, a COVID boom. There's been recent reports about Racing Queensland. I think their impact they've had and their revenue raised to the government's doubled, I think, in the last sort of 5 years. But now there's a story or a narrative saying that we need to future-proof racing in New South Wales. But there, as you just mentioned, there's a lingering debt of around $200 million. And it's not just the ATC, it's a raft of clubs, as we're aware. There's been something published. I haven't got my finger on where exactly it is, but I'd say the list of clubs that have got long-term loans outstanding, I think there'd be about 15 sort of clubs. So the interesting fact here is, or not so much fact, but the question is, if we've just gone through the COVID boom and punters and bookmakers have never, I guess, been taxed at a higher rate, there's been all this injection of cash into the industry. How come some of these debts haven't been cleared, and why is the ATC in such debt if the regulator is controlling all the funds? And it's just the dollars and cents are just not adding up here.
If roughly what their income last year, roughly just from wagering, was $600 million, Racing New South Wales. So if you're saying it's future-proofing the industry by selling this and it's $5 billion, it's only 8-9 years of income, and that's not including whatever other income they have. So it doesn't, and that's what you're saying. It's not being passed on to the clubs. They're going backwards at a rate. It's like as you said, there's a list up to 195 million, and it's not even current. They're probably bigger now. So it just doesn't make sense logically from us looking outside in.
Well, I think what we'll find here is that the role of the regulators, and we're talking about Racing New South Wales, Racing Victoria, Racing Queensland, they all vary slightly differently. But they've become much more funders as well as regulators within the industry. And because of the change in the way that the racing's been funded, and bear in mind these PRAs were all sort of founded around the start of the century, so around about 2000, things have changed dramatically in the wagering landscape since then, and they've changed dramatically in terms of where the funding comes from. And obviously, with race fields and point of consumption tax and all the various other changes, it's put us in a situation now where the situation's changed a lot, and the money's coming directly into the PRAs in order for distribution. And it changes the power dynamic. The clubs, for example, if you look at in New South Wales, the clubs get a cut pretty much of the TAB. Obviously, TAB revenue has not gone up significantly. Over the course of the last 10 years, I think it's pretty much flat on what the ATC have got. So they're not getting any extra, and so they're getting themselves in a situation where obviously everything's going, cost of things are going up, and their wagering revenue is not increasing, and puts them in all these clubs in a very difficult position.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense to anyone, does it? Really, like that they're not receiving more anyway.
Well, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because the wagering has increased, and it had increased significantly all through COVID. But now
it's just TAB that isn't.
Yeah, and now I guess the cost of living crisis and everything that we're in, and all the financial constraints that have been happening for the last sort of 12 or 18 months, things are starting to flatten off. And now I guess there's people are starting to shake the tin, saying, okay, where's all this money going to be for this shortfall that we've got because of
we should be flourishing now.
Well,
we should be flourishing now. We're not. If we're in a position where we have to sell core assets, surely addressing why there's a sustainability issue when we should be in our prime. And I think that's a lot of what people have touched on to a certain degree, haven't they? Whether it's just distribution, the power that they've got, or is there mismanagement? Is there an issue with sustainability for everybody going forward that supersedes the sale of Rosehill?
And I think there's other factors as well. Like, I think we've lost 43 meetings after acceptance time. Those figures are from Paul Daly at Ratings to Win.
It's like up to 100 if you're including picnics and all sorts.
Which further puts downward pressure. And as soon as track ratings get beyond, I guess, the good and the soft range, punters' turnover dips as well. So I think the allocation of funding to the industry has definitely changed, with the regulators now controlling that. But punters are, without a shadow of a doubt, who fund the game. And obviously bookmakers sort of work with PRAs in a joint venture type setup where they collect the bets, they collect all the money, and then they pass the tax back through to the various...
We'll put it on Robbie when he comes on, hopefully, to say, like, it's he's in the interesting position that he's been an on-course bookmaker for his whole life.
Yeah, third generation.
And now he's also been part of the new generation of online bookmaking from basically the start as well. So he's seen both sides of the fence there, and he's turnover in one hand and turnover in the other. And it'd be interesting to see what he says, whether it's been a positive, whether it's hard of him to hold money now, and all those sorts of things.
Because when you see the big list of, I just saw it before, and we'll try and tweet it out and publish it later today at Little Birdie TV. But there's about 15 tracks throughout New South Wales that have borrowed money off Racing New South Wales and are yet to pay it off. And should they sell the land, they have to pay back what's been loaned to them. Should they receive a windfall of cash? So,
Mr. Hall basically said that these clubs are, in his submission, I believe that he basically said a lot of these clubs are being held in a position now that they can't fund any projects, any upgrades to their own facilities, and they have to rely upon the PRA to do that. And in order to have those demands met, or suggestions met, that they have to make sacrifices, whether it be control of their club board, or in some places the title to that facility. So.
And I'd say, just looking at this, I'd say that the list is, it's $1 million across, or on average across these clubs. But you've got Albury, Ballina, Bathurst, ATC is obviously the biggest one at 139 million. You've got Canterbury, Coffs Harbour, Dubbo, Gosford, Goulburn, Hawkesbury, Muswellbrook, Murrumbidgee, which is Wagga, Newcastle Jockey Club is 13 million, Scone, Tuncurry. So some of those it's obviously developments and things like that, but. It is enticing and appetising to clear off or know that there's some money there if you can sell.
They're all vulnerable.
Any of those sort of assets.
All these clubs are vulnerable.
100%. And then the concern here is there's been promised upgrades of Scone and Cessnock, and there's hundreds worth of boxes that haven't been built. So,
and I think that includes government funding that has been contributed to that to upgrade those facilities.
So questions need to be asked. Well, where's that money, and when will they start turning the soil there and get things rolling there? But might be a good segue into speaking to Rob Waterhouse. I think we've got him on the line now, and for people that don't know, Robbie Waterhouse is partner of Gay Waterhouse, the famous trainer, and he's obviously got 50 years of bookmaking experience. So he's seen the transition from on-course betting to online betting, and third-generation bookmaker, obviously. Father.
He's also a specially translator now for Gay, now that she's having a few hearing issues in the parliamentary inquiries.
And was fortunate enough to sit within the parliamentary inquiry. I think it was last week. It could be 2 weeks ago. Time's getting away from me. But welcome to the show, Robbie Waterhouse.
Thank you very much.
Robbie, I'm just going to put a couple of graphics up on screen, and these are new to Bren O'Brien from the Straight as well, and I've got John Walter in studio with me here up at the Gold Coast. But courtesy of our major sponsor, TopSport, I've got some turnover figures from a percentage point of view, just looking at the tracks across Victoria first, and this is how turnover's been made up, given their wagering figures over the last 5 years. So it's a fair sample size. TopSport, pretty well-established bookmaker, and I'd assume that the figures are pretty online with other bookmakers. But Caulfield, 14.7% of turnover, Flemington 18.3%, Moonee Valley 8.9%, Sandown 9.2%, which is also mooted for sale, and then every other track in Victoria combined is 48.9%. If you have a look at the slide on the screen now, it's New South Wales turnover over the similar period over 5 years. You've got Rosehill at 14.35%. You've got Randwick 21.2%. The inner track, Randwick Kensington, is 2.8%. Then you've got Warwick Farm at 3.9%. Canterbury 3.5%, and all other tracks combined are 54.25%. So I look at that and I scratch my head even further, thinking you've got the second highest turnover track in Rosehill at 14.35%, and it's only beaten by, I guess, someone like Randwick and Flemington. So, and well, Caulfield probably just nails it well at 14.4%. So we're talking about top four tracks in Australia, and its futures on the line. Before I get your comments on that one, Robbie, I'll also just post up a little bit of a graphic of Dave Dwyer, who sent in some comments, and he's the president of the Bookmakers Association in New South Wales. My conversation with him off air was that Dave said that he had no knowledge as to the reasoning or positions of Racing New South Wales or ATC. Randwick appears to be the only place where money is spent. He went on to say that the ATC needs to only spend what it earns, and if that is less prize money, then so be it. When South Australia lost Victoria Park, it gained little. Harold Park, another example. Menangle is a good track, but the crowd is zero. Will people flock to a new track in Horsley Park? I definitely think Sydney needs Rosehill. So they were all comments I asked him on the show. I think he had some prior commitments, but they were the comments that he sort of passed on. I didn't lead him into any questions, but they were his short, succinct answers and views, I guess, on the totality of the situation that we're in. But Robbie, just on those turnover figures and being a bookmaker yourself, it's pretty clear that Rosehill's a popular place to bet. It's steeped in history. It's been around for 140 years. It's home of the Golden Slipper. What are your thoughts after seeing those turnover figures and the proposed sale?
Well, those turnover figures play no part in the decision of some people to sell Rosehill. The reason they want to sell is because it represents a pot full of money, possibly. They've talked about the figure of $5 billion, but no one's offered $5 billion. The government most certainly won't be paying that for it. And I suspect the actual figure will be much, much less than that. But it's not a question of, is it a good course or isn't it a good course? It's just a question of, here's a pot full of money, the same as they did with Harold Park. Harold Park was sold for a lot of money, and they said at the time was to secure the future of trotting. It's just that as a Harold Park bookmaker, you'd get more people on the coldest, wettest night of the year to Harold Park than you'd get to the Golden Slipper Day, whereas now absolutely zero people. There's no public entrance at Menangle. Public isn't welcome there at all. It's absolute travesty. But so it's not nothing to do with whether it's a good track for people to bet on or what else. It just represents a pot full of money. And I suppose the saddest thing is that the STC members bought it in 1947 for £189,000. But of course, the money won't be going to the members. It'll be going to the industry if it's up to Racing New South Wales. And the industry is really, that means breeders and owners. That ignores 97% of people that like horse racing.
Bren informed us earlier that that the ATC board could bypass the Clubs Act and make a decision to sell regardless of the members' vote.
Potentially, yeah.
From a legal standpoint, is that true to your knowledge, or do you think it's incorrect?
Well, I can understand his saying that. When there was a meeting to decide whether to merge the STC and the AJC, the STC members voted overwhelmingly to reject it. And the very next day, the boards decided to join the clubs. But I'm told that legally speaking, they have to, under the Clubs Act, they have to, if it's a core asset, they have to get 50% of members to, or 51% of members to agree to sell it. The only way around it would be for the government to pass legislation resuming it. But with the figure $5 billion being spoken about, and the government has no money to spend on this, I don't think there's any likelihood. And I'm sure there was talk that the club might put to the members that it be declared a non-core asset, which on the balance sheet must represent 97% of their assets. How you could imagine it be declared a non-core asset, I don't understand. And I don't think the members would be silly enough to do that.
So initial polling was that only 13% had indicated they want the sale to proceed. Off the back of the inquiry that you attended, it sounds like trainers, breeders, owners, punters all appear, and the members appear opposed to the sale. Would you support a partial sale or development around Rosehill? Obviously, that's starting to be pushed by some others, and instead of, say, 25,000 people, there could be capacity. I think this new proposal is saying that maybe 10,000 residencies could be built in and around Rosehill, similar to that of, I guess, the redevelopment of Moonee Valley down in Victoria. What's your position there?
Well, firstly, I'd have to say that I don't believe the 13% are in favour of members are in favour of selling Rosehill. I'm yet to find anyone at the races who's a member who would thinks it's a good idea. I just think that's just rubbish. As regards, they talk about 25,000 homes. In my back of the old calculations, if you decide not to have any sporting facilities or shopping centres or schools, you need 60-storey buildings to achieve that number. And I think to say to get 10,000 in the surrounding land is just dreaming. But having said that, for instance, the circus land and the bowling club are surplus to what's needed. Car parks perhaps could be all people would sit inside. I'd only say that I'd rather them being sold, I'd rather them being a recurring income to the club, because the money will just be lost. They'll just increase prize money. It'll just be dissipated away. So, look, I'm not against any development, of course, but I'd love the money to go to being a recurring income rather than just lost.
That's the same with the $5 billion, to be honest. Like, I think 187 million was the number for Harold Park, and if that's not long gone, I'd be very surprised.
Yes, of course. Same as Victoria Park in Adelaide. But look, the one thing for sure is that the $5 billion won't be a cheque, won't be written to or any amount, whatever it's sold for, won't go to the club for the club's order wants to. It's been said it'll be go to the industry, and the industry really means Racing New South Wales. And I suppose the interesting thing is that Racing New South Wales was set up following the Temby report, and it was set up purely as a regulator. And if you read the Temby report, the initial legislation in 1996, and the second reading speeches, all that Racing New South Wales is about is being a regulator, supervising, controlling, licensing, and so forth. And it wasn't until Racing New South Wales won a court case in 2012 that it received this flood of money. And of course, it is able to decide how to use it. It's unthinkable to me that they make loans to any club. They should be grants, or it should be given all over. I don't see Racing New South Wales shouldn't be a cash box. And the fact they've spent $250,000 buying eclectic properties around the state when racecourses are in disrepair is outrageous. And I don't understand why racing people put up with it.
But I think that's the problem, and I think that's what's sort of come about a little bit by that inquiry you attended. It feels like they don't have a choice in the matter, and I understand there's a little bit of a kickback now, but everyone's the theme was that it's scary to put your hand up, isn't it?
But what do you mean there's no choice?
I feel everyone feels like they put their life on the line if they if they put their hand up and asked any questions.
Yes, well, I understand that, but really the committee should be standing up and being counted, shouldn't they? And say not putting up with it. And the government should put an end to it.
But the same feel is that the committees aren't really committees. They're they really are a bit of, I think the word that was used was a bit of a monopoly, a bit of a dictatorship. That's the feel that the industry has.
But I think the media blackout just proves how true the findings of the inquiry were. Like, I think it was
it's only just begun.
Well, pretty clear that John O'Shea had made that comment about being pressured, and there has not been a peep out of the media. There might have been one or two stories through the New South Wales press. And the only story that you hear is Chris Minns telling everyone how good it is, and then like a double down of that. But you've got all these great journalists in New South Wales that cover racing 24/7, but they're all none of them have got an opinion on probably the biggest thing in racing since COVID or equine influenza. I'd say it's the biggest thing to happen in racing in 20 years. So it only justifies
it's a potential turning point in the whole position of racing in the state.
Bren, have you got any questions for Robbie?
I guess, Robbie, is it your sort of view? I mean, it came out through the inquiry that there's a suggestion that Racing New South Wales has too much power and too much, I guess, commercial power within that decision-making within New South Wales racing. What's your view as to where we take it from here? If taking aside the political ramifications of this, which is difficult to do, how do we redesign racing moving forward? Obviously, there needs to be a review of that Thoroughbred Racing Act in 1996, possibly a revamp. But what does a racing funding model look like, and what does a Racing New South Wales regulator type role look like in a world where we don't have this sort of conflict between someone being a funder and being a regulator?
Well, if you go back to the 1996 Act and Racing New South Wales becomes purely the regulator, and in 1986, all the money from the TAB and the bookmakers went to the race clubs. If you went back to that model, all problems were solved. The AJC would have so much money to do whatever they want to do with it, rather than putting themselves into debt to Racing New South Wales. It's outrageous that they should have any debts.
Is there a danger if we go back to a club-based model, right? So we've, across, regardless of where you are, Victoria, New South Wales or whatever, is the danger if you go back to that, we go back to the old school. Probably not so much in Sydney because you've got a unified club, but you get through that more parochial model where people are not planning for the greater good. I'm not saying it's happening now, but is there a danger that if you go back to that club-based model, that may be what happened?
Well, there's no doubt the tracks everywhere were better maintained in the old days than now, and the facilities were better. I think the old way was better. I suppose if I had my way in Sydney, I'd change it from being one club in charge of Sydney to being 4 clubs. I'd have a Rosehill club and a Canterbury Park club and a Warwick Farm club and a Randwick club with local businessmen being in charge of it and drumming along, getting local people to go to it. I don't see the advantage of having one club apart from some cost savings with dealing with the race nominations and so forth. I just think it's better to have have more clubs and less control.
Especially when it's a little bit blurry, I think, where the ATC and the Racing New South Wales stop. They seem to be nearly intertwined.
And I think proof of a good working model of that is the Melbourne Racing Club. Melbourne Racing Club would probably got more funds than Racing Victoria because they've managed their own assets and they've done their own thing for so long. They've gone and done media rights deals. They've invested or divested into other off-course wagering and pubs and all those sort of things, and they've pulled themselves in a position of strength.
My argument against that one is that their core business is not in racing, and they admit they lose $15 million a year on racing alone. So this sort of speaks to the broader challenge around clubs making money out of their core product and racing, whether it's core business or not. Not a criticism of the Melbourne Racing Club, but just an observation of where it sits. The VRC are in financial challenges as well because they've built. They've spent a lot of money investing in infrastructure, which hasn't necessarily yielded the returns they would hope. I think the danger we go down the clubs model, and I can see exactly what Robbie's talking about. I see the importance of that. The challenge I have with that is that you have businesses which aren't invested in the day-to-day running of racing. They're more interested in building out commercial empires elsewhere, which is fine. It's their prerogative, but is it to the benefit of racing?
A recurring income is what they need. Getting a pocket full of cash is of no use. The action, one saying, is income producing.
And I think that's where Racing New South Wales has started to invest in all these other side projects rather than putting money back into where horse racing
And
makes money
not
into their
seemingly
tracks
as a
and into their
regulator.
facilities. So
Well, it has enormous provisions built into its budget. Like it's provisioned, it's pushing this money forward that it's built out, whether it be through real estate or other provisions forward. And the question is, what does that mean for racing? When does that money come back into actually running the racing game? That's the question, Nick.
yeah, well, it's because Racing New South Wales, Bren, are doing exactly what the clubs are doing in Victoria or MRC are doing. But
But that's not their role particularly.
The race, none of the properties that Race New South Wales invest in are income producing. They're not businesses.
Well, how could that be?
Surely
how's
Kieran Maher's
Maher?
at least paying, surely.
Yeah, surely he's
But
paying there.
paying a peppercorn rental.
Yeah, probably.
Depends on the value of that property, yes. That property in particular is a very highly valuable property. It'd be interesting to see what the fees on that would be.
The question, like Robbie's doesn't come on here much. As a regulator, I deal with when I was a rider's agent, deal with a lot of trainers, still deal with them a lot. Ever since cost of living, a lot of raising prices for everything on their end as well. A lot of trainers to me seem to be in financial dire trouble. Would it be an idea for Racing New South Wales to look into something more along the lines of all invoicing going through them to protect trainers from bad debt, owners from strange costs being added, these syndicators and bloodstock agents. Everyone seems to be under pressure, and I feel like trainers are sort of pushing the line, not saying that a lot of them are in cost to try and keep themselves above water. A lot of owners are in trouble. I've got quite a few trainers I speak to are sort of 20, 30% bad debt, 60 days or more, which is obviously crippling for their businesses. Should they be looking into, spending money and resources in these sorts of areas to protect everyone rather than what they're doing currently?
I'm married to a trainer, and she might be in a particular position, but her bad debts are virtually nil on the one hand, but she complains at the high cost of renting boxes and track fees and whatever else. And I would, from my viewpoint, I think they should be making those zero. I think they should be, if a trainer trains a track, why should you have to rent boxes? You should be given the boxes, the same as it is in Hong Kong, and the same as track fees and whatever else. I just don't see the point of it. I just think they should be giving them the facilities free.
Is there any chance, as another one of my silly ideas, is it obviously was a hobby-driven sport to a certain degree, like a nationwide, anyone can be a trainer, in certain parts of the state. Does it need to become a little bit more professional, a little bit more Hong Kong style, which again would appeal to punters too a lot more, even the Hong Kong punters? If we sort of built sort of super training areas in countries, consolidated a lot of the costs and put them all into sort of hubs and made it a little bit more like the Hong Kong style across the board, whether that's country, provincial or metropolitan level, really tried to build that competitive nature. And like you say, take a lot of the pressures off trainers, jockeys, every participant, put that back on the regulators to make sure the show's running correctly, tracks are, in great order, we're spending where we need to be there, providing all the information we can to punters, just really making the industry a lot more professional. I know it's not going to make everybody happy, that sort of model, but is that something that we maybe need to be working towards rather than,
There's no doubt the trainers that train away from race courses and private training tracks do very poorly. I think it's a mistake, and there are other problems apart from poor results. It's hard to get staff, and it's a long way to live and what else. So I think the present thing of training on race courses is great, and I regret that Caulfield's got rid of its trainers.
I think most of those trainers that have been relocated out of Caulfield would be probably pretty happy at Cranbourne and Pakenham, and have got good results since.
Yes, well, possibly that's true, but in the same way as the Harold Park trainers that relocated from Angle, I think it's great. It's just that no one goes to trots anymore.
Just a last one from me, Robbie. Do you think a sale of Canterbury, Canterbury's been the one track that's been up for sale, and everyone's been speaking about it for a long time. And when there was talk of a sale of a track, everyone thought, oh, what's going to be Canterbury? And then everyone was like, oh, hang on, no, it's Rosehill. Do you think a sale of Canterbury will solve the black hole that New South Wales are in?
Well, all the officials I speak to think that punters hate Canterbury. And all I can say is that Canterbury is the best course on a Wednesday. And I wish they had Saturday racing. The punters love Canterbury. They think it's great. They tell me there are certain problems only part of it can be developed. I don't understand why, but there's not the money that you would have thought. But look, racing is absolutely flying. Income in New South Wales is, I think, about $750 million a year in betting income. Why can't it sustain the race course? Why do we have to sell anything? I never hear anyone say, let's buy a race course. And look, I heard you talk about Horsley Park becoming a race course. It's quite funny. Every race course I can think of is built in a very old flat valley where it's nice and flat. Horsley Park's uphill down Dale. It will never be a race course. It's just an impossibility. They're just dreaming that.
And it'll be a ghost town, even if it somehow by miracle did eventuate.
Yeah, look, if you said you're going to make it a steeple course track, I could understand, but it could never.
Bren, have you got any final questions for Robbie before we let him go?
Not specifically, I guess. Just a general comment, Robbie, on I guess you've been around Sydney racing your entire life. Where does this current environment and this current sort of, I guess, the temperature of the current environment sit politically? Do you feel like there's a real appetite for change through this inquiry and what can be sort of executed from this? Or do you feel like there's a window here where people are going to get fired up and then we're going to find ourselves in a similar situation either 12 months down the line or 5 years down the line where we're talking about selling race courses?
Look, the situation here has happened by accident. It's grown like Topsy. No one dreamt that racing New South Wales would be a money bags and in charge of all the money in racing. And it's got to be returned to what it was, a regulator. And they do a good job as a regulator. But the racing belongs to the clubs. But unfortunately, Racing New South Wales has discovered a life of its own, has become a Frankensteinian monster. And has found a way to all the clubs by lending the money rather than granting the money.
And if they get another $5 billion, for argument's sake, will that help that situation?
Exactly.
Well, no, won't. They order the clubs to pay certain levels of prize money, but won't give them the funds to do it. And at Randwick, we've had the escalators going up to the car park broken for 4 years. They just don't have the funds to fix them. There are lots of things wrong with in disrepair at Randwick because they just don't have the money.
And all the clubs are in that same position.
I think Robbie's right. If you have two sets of children, for example, and one you give welfare to and handouts for 10 years in their life, and then you tell another person, all right, you're going to have to make the best of whatever and give them a smaller bank of money and then let them run free, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the person that makes their own luck and has got incentive to grow their business that'll come out on top. Robbie, we'll cut you off now, but appreciate your time this morning and good luck with your endeavours, and I'm sure everyone's going to let out of that.
Make sure that you're not 3,400 hold or whatever it was there at Flemington the other day. I hope you weren't feeling pressure on every race there. You would have been under the pump.
Yeah. Oh well, unfortunately, they've moved the betting ring out away from all the people. And a cold, wet day. It's just the nature of it. But unfortunately, the clubs, because we pay our money to the regulator, they don't realise we pay them, and they're just not appreciative at all.
That's true too, right? That's true.
My wife and I have a dog, and I buy the food, and Gay feeds the dog. The dog loves.
Oh,
not grateful to us.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad.
All right, thanks for your time, Robbie. And it might be time to bring in our second guest. He's been eavesdropping in, and he's a familiar face from the Little Birdie TV and the Bet Dr. Clan. But Marc Lambourne, punter and director of Racing Rant, joins us.
No better man.
Thanks, Robbie. How are you, Marc?
Yes, good. Thanks, Nick. G'day, Bren. G'day, John.
Mr. Lambourne.
Marc, obviously you've got the ear of so many punters. A lot of your customers are some of the biggest punters in Australia. What's the temperature and the vibe in the Racing Rant chat and all the people that you speak to, not just, I guess, in your chat rooms and the business that you've forged online out of necessity, but you're obviously close to a lot of bookmakers on course. What's the temperature like?
Well, look, as Rob says, he's not spoken to anyone that's in favour of this particular sale of Rosehill. I really don't think the issue has become about the sale of Rosehill. It's become a much broader issue. It's headed towards how we run racing. And It's arisen because the clubs have effectively held up their hand as victims, which I see as not a positive way to conduct the process. But it's certainly devolved into should we or shall we kill the king, and who is Oliver Cromwell? So as far as the people on the ground that I have access to, I mean it's obviously wholly in favour of keeping Rosehill. But I think there are much wider political ramifications in the way that this is played out.
So trainers, jockeys, breeders, punters, most of them are racing lifers. Most can't skip between corporate gigs, as many on these corporate boards do. Do you think our racing boards represent participants well enough?
They have obviously changed with the times. So I think as much as I'm nostalgic and sentimental about the way that we used to run racing, because I came into racing a long time ago, the fact is that things are done differently now. And Racing New South Wales has grabbed the ball and run with it. We saw a dramatic shift in the way that people bet on racing, and the original funding model for racing, which was all tote and a little bit of stamp duty on the bookmakers, has shifted to effectively race fields and POC tax. So Racing New South Wales has seized the initiative in those areas and managed to grab hold of all the power in racing, because funding is power. So we're basically at a situation where we're looking at that going, is that a good idea? Can we do anything about it? It's obviously a flashpoint where clubs are perhaps seeing the need to stand up and renegotiate, really, the deal, because as Rob said, once upon a time, the clubs received all the funding, the regulator was just standing aside. And it is pertinent to point out that, of course, since Racing New South Wales grabbed all that power, they have progressed racing in a massive way. As Rob says, racing is flying in many ways. Obviously, we can point to various facets of racing that are struggling, but the fact is that Racing New South Wales has been a force for good in New South Wales, and other jurisdictions have operated in not dissimilar fashion. So we're really looking at a situation where, because of the power grab, we've ended up with an autocracy. Should we look at ameliorating that in some way? Certainly assassination is fairly dramatic sort of way of affecting some sort of change, but it's now a point where we're all talking about, is this the best way to run racing, with the fact in mind that racing has progressed significantly under the current regime.
So what's your opinion? Do you think the power should be returned to the clubs and they need to push their own wheelbarrow and create their own results, or as Rob sort of suggested? Or
I can't see the landscape supporting that. I think that, it's fundamentally changed, and it's more about clubs going into negotiations with the all-powerful regulator and attempting to ameliorate some of the aspects of that omniscient power that are causing issues. So it's like this. I went to not the first members meeting, the second members meeting at the ATC, and straight away you got the feeling that this was about the fact that the ATC was struggling for money and they couldn't see their way out. And the fact is that, not the fact is, but an obvious option for the ATC is to enter into to renegotiate with Racing New South Wales. They're clearly finding things difficult, but there must be other ways to engage with the regulator, who has basically assumed all the power.
Is there a problem though, which is David Hall, wasn't it? The things that he pushed upon, that the only true people that are independent currently are the members as a whole. Maybe the ATC board is potentially stacked to a certain degree. Mr. Hall also pointed on that a lot of these race clubs, in order to get the funding, are sort of giving over a lot of power. So their committees are also stacked. Who actually is left to go up against them other than, the membership group is probably the question I'd be interested in.
Well, obviously in a process of renegotiation, you have a number of options, and perhaps a last resort option is to withdraw your services. I'm not sure how that sits with the running of racing and whether Racing New South Wales is in a position to actually enforce or force clubs to provide their services. But Racing New South Wales, in its power shift, has in fact lost sight, and they've been allowed to lose sight, and they've clearly had an agenda to go that way, that they don't actually put the show on. Everyone recognises that. So it is really up to this is a flashpoint or a focal point where I think that it's been exposed that Racing New South Wales has this enormous power, but may be forced into a position politically to actually engage with its stakeholders, I guess.
But if they're in control of everything now, if you hypothetically, they're in control of the ATC board, if they're in control of 90% of race clubs already, who is going to actually kick back? If it's if you know what I'm sort of heading, it's very difficult. Like, it's not just going to be the ATC members that can get this ball rolling. If there's a lot bigger issues than just the Rosehill sale, obviously it's the focal point, but it's all the other
issues that are bubbling away.
Yeah, and like even when you hear sort of racing's flying, on paper it may be, but I actually don't. There might be a handful of trainers, breeders that are really flying, and the rest of it seems sort of on a knife's edge to me. Whether you're a trainer, jockeys are going well because they're sort of directly funded from prize money and those sort of increased racing and all. Yeah, they're fine. So, but every other, like punters, to me it seems decline, worse prices, worse products, unless you're part of the chosen few, which is going to it's on a knife's edge too. A few decisions that could change. Owners of highest costs, higher breeding prices. Everyone except for a select few are really not flying from where I'm sitting.
If racing's flying so much, why are people so disgruntled or more disgruntled than ever before? Because it is. It's never been tougher to try and make an earn as a punter, and then you've got everyone jumping out of this inquiry saying that they're not happy.
Yeah, and it's but the funding is there. That's why it is flying. So it is a great time for this to happen. But it's just such a big role to try and I wouldn't want to be in PVL shoes any day of the week. The guy is incredible at what he does, and if we sort of can harness him and point him in the right direction, he can continue to be that person. It's just a matter of whether anyone's in a position to not bring him into line's a bad way to put it, but for racing, the greater good to come out on top.
All right, so the board of the ATC is perhaps best placed to actually engage with Racing New South Wales because they put on the showpiece product. And there's no doubt that Randwick and Rosehill represent the pointy end of racing in New South Wales. So, I mean, you mentioned various stakeholders that feel powerless and disgruntled, and I get it. But they're sort of not in a position to exercise much power because of the way that the setup itself. But in this particular case, I see some leadership possible from both the board of the ATC and the New South Wales state government.
I think one of the things, Mark, to sort of point around about that is that this Rosehill proposal was led by the ATC executive, not the ATC board. The full ATC board wasn't informed about this until 3 weeks after it was discussed with the state government by the ATC executive. So I think in that situation where you have executives making decisions and making strategic decisions, the board aren't necessarily across all the details of that before it goes to. I think in this situation, it just doesn't follow proper process. And
how's that possible? That's my first question. Like, how is that actually possible?
Well, racing's a multi-billion-dollar sport, right? And constantly, this is not just a ATC, Racing New South Wales problem. This is a problem across the board. I report about these things every day, be it being Racing Queensland, be it Racing Victoria. The difference I see in New South Wales is probably because of the one Metro Club model. It has enabled the relationship to get particularly cosy. And I think that that's probably part of the challenge around the club model and why, to a certain extent, having more clubs does help, even though Racing Victoria has more political headaches than Racing New South Wales because it has to deal with more stakeholders. It does create a level of accountability around what's going on. So just stepping back away from that, though, it relies upon everyone doing the right thing, Mark. And this is probably the challenge that we've got across the board, is that everybody sees their point of view but does it work for the greater good? Racing is terrible at managing its customers. We talked about those people before about when you're talking about punters, owners, syndicate members, whoever they are, they're all customers of racing, right? Not very good at that. But it's also not very good at coming together as part of a greater good. We can't do it Australia-wide. It's just impossible. And we seem not to be able to do it on a state-by-state basis with some of these issues. I mean, how does racing confront that? How does racing break that, I guess, self-interested core? Because dictatorships and things like that work pretty well as a business model when you're on the way up. But when you're on the way down, it takes you down a pretty slippery ramp, doesn't it?
Well, if the fundamental issue is that there's a disconnect between the suppliers and the customers. So we created this setup in 1964 with the invention of the tab. We basically put in third party, in this case, to create that disconnect. So I can't see that racing can be run any other way, given the way that we chose to set it up funding wise. So it's a matter of working with what we've got. I'm sure that, we will in 10 years' time be continually disgruntled with the way that we're treated as customers in this game because of the very nature of our racing model.
And just touching on punters there, like to me, it seems a one-way ship at the moment. We'll end up with 2, 3, maybe 4 bookmakers, whatever's left of Betfair and whatever's left of the tote inside 10 years. Like one or two little changes in whether it's advertising, POC increases, all the little guys will be gone. You'll be left with, sports bet Ladbrokes, maybe one or two others, and whatever Betfair is. And then you're talking about sustaining these levels of prize money and things on the back of that. That's a huge thing that hasn't come up in this inquiry yet, and has to be looked at. Like future proofing the industry, to me, is future proofing the funding model. And they're one or two decisions away from a train wreck from where I'm sitting.
Right, but that's as a result of the fundamental disconnect that I pointed to, and you won't get even an appetite for change in the right quarters until the things have headed so far south that it's required. I mean, that is the nature of the thing. So I would counsel we accept what we've got and what we're working with, and attempt to work with that. I see that's the best option. Obviously, we can sit here and complain till the cows come home, but somehow...
I'm not even complaining. I'm like talking from a punter. I'm just accepting that's what it's going to be as a punter. I'm not saying that it's even... I'm saying as an industry-wide for the greater good, that's what we're looking at. So we can see that coming to a certain degree, but it doesn't feel like the industry can. And maybe it's a downside for us, and that's why we sort of concentrate on it more. But it's got to be a huge downside for the whole industry as well, because we're the ones who have, say we're the people who can afford to bet. We can afford to turn over money, and,
so we can see it. They can't, and they won't see it. They won't see it until it's actually in their face, and in their face looks a long way down the track.
Yeah, I think just quickly touching on this. You spoke before about the concentration of bookmakers, right? So you talk about, particularly if we're talking about sports bet and Ladbrokes having a strong bit of power, Bet365 to a certain extent. There's a few others as well. Now, just be mindful of the fact, and this is a really crucial part of the Australian funding model going forward, right? So we're in a situation now where the corporate revolution has funded this massive surge in revenue flowing back into racing and massive surge in prize money, right? And so that's been a great plus, and it's created a lot of opportunities within racing. The challenge is going to be, we've got internationally owned companies, publicly owned, internationally owned companies, whose stated commercial goal, if you're talking about Flutter and you're talking about Entain, it's not a criticism, just an observation, the international plans are around sports betting. Sports betting has become such a greater part of the pie. There's always been this sort of thing about sports betting and racing. Oh no, it'll only be a little bit. Well, we saw last year, even with TAB, right? Sports betting went up 6.5% the first half of this year, turnover. Racing betting went down 6%. We are moving to a model where these companies, for the benefit of their shareholders, need to pivot towards sports betting because there's more growth in it, there's more upsides, they pay less product fees, and racing's becoming quite expensive. So what guarantees are those companies are going to hang around for the greater good of racing? There's no guarantee at all.
None.
I think that's a much bigger concern, is that in 10 years' time, it won't matter because no one will be betting on racing, and we're all sitting there betting to 130% markets going, how did this happen?
won't be 130, it'll be higher than that.
Well, exactly. And that's, I guess, that's the perspective that we see. Like John and I have worked in bookmakers and I've worked in Betfair and can see those sort of trends. And
I agree that at the moment they're using racing to convert punters to sport. You know, like they're using our database for argument's sake for that we've built over the last 100 years, and where they're trying to convert them by the day, and eventually they won't care about racing. So whereas we want to make it sustainable, we want to do all these things, and I agree with Marc. I don't think anyone's listening, but I don't know how to change that.
Well, look, it may be that we've made our product too expensive. So, I mean, unfortunately, we as an industry have.
Yes.
So it could well be that if the wholesalers are saying, look, we'd rather not shift your product, we'd rather shift someone else's product, then we may be forced into a situation where we offer the wholesaler a cheaper price. We need to work with them everywhere. Like they are an important part. I mean, unfortunately, we've ended up with a Coles and Woolies, a Colesworth sort of set up in racing as well with these giants. And we are feeling like the dairy farmers, going, well, we're stuck here, but we have to exercise whatever power we've got and negotiate in whatever good faith that we can.
The only difference I feel is that we've probably made our decisions as an industry for the long time, but now that we've let POC tax in over and above everything else, how do you go back from that?
Well,
it's a very leaky boat.
Yeah. Well, we're in the same leaky boat as the club, so we've let the genie out of the bottle. The clubs have let the genie out of the bottle, so we've both got a similar type problem. Marc, did you think the public response and the betting public would have absorbed the news better had they provided a better solution than Horsley Park? I understand that obviously Rob Waterhouse is vehemently opposed to the Horsley Park, but if there was a better picture painted about an upgrade of Warwick Farm, slight changes or upgrades there, a better surface or something, a better facility at Canterbury.
Can I just jump in quickly on that one? With Horsley Park, I just want to clarify. The ATC never said they want to put a racetrack there. They said they want to put a training facility there. So it's important to sort of note with that the brick pit is the proposal for a place within Homebush is what they're talking about as a possible alternative, what's been mooted, but it's never been actually specifically put forward that Horsley Park is a race course that they would look to use. They would look to be like a training facility out there, but not a race course. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I'm not sure that the brick pit's an actual viable.
Oh, it's not. I don't think it is either, but it is. But they've never said that they want to move a race course out to Horsley Park. They may do it, but the ATC have never expressly said that.
These are all the things that drive you mad, like logically, that say there's 5 billion comes in, $1 billion goes to Horsley Park, 2 billion you're left with nothing, but you've now got no Rosehill. It just doesn't. I guess the question
I was trying to ask is if they had have gone, rather than release the information and it set it amongst the public, you gave us the timeline earlier, October 26th, and then it sort of got released on December 7th. Had they gone to the public and us racing consumers and all the participants and given us a plan to say, okay, Hawkesbury's going to be the new Rosehill and Warwick Farm's going to be number 2, and we're going to do, in more detail and more depth. Do you think that's been the cause of greatest concern, Marc? Because from what you've said, it doesn't sound to me that you think that the sale of Rosehill's going to be the downfall of racing. You're pretty happy with the way things are going from Racing New South Wales controlling things.
Well, happy is you're putting words in my mouth there. Look, there wasn't a very little thought given to the announcement. I think that, but we're all passionate racing people, and every passionate racing person is aghast at the thought of the sale of Rosehill. But there are, millions of recreational interests that would have heard that announcement and gone, "Oh, they're going to sell Rosehill. Okay, well, they just roll with it." And I think that must have been the perception of the the executive that went to the state government. But clearly, they didn't have a concrete idea of how this would look, or certainly a concrete enough idea to actually make it palatable to the people that were going to be noisiest about it, which is us.
The Rosehill trainers were the other thing that confused me, right? There's a pretty significant trainer that trains out of Rosehill. He said he didn't know anything about it. There's other Rosehill trainers that said that they weren't discussed. Why would you go to them to go with to say, hey, this is what we're going to announce. Don't worry. We'll take care of you. You'll all get X amount of money to move to wherever you need to go. We'll make sure it's all fine. So don't come out against it. That was never done. Like, for me, the whole process has been botched from a consultation point of view. Like, if you're trying to get it across the line, you're starting from a long way back where you're telling people what they should know, not bring them along for the ride.
It does have the feel of the 130% market. So the opinion of the PRAs that punters aren't really, recreational punters aren't savvy, and they will go along with the flow, and that's what the announcement sort of felt the same. And it'll be just like, don't worry, the mass will just forget about it and roll with it.
Well, it was presented as we need money, we desperately need money, rather than actually saying, look, we're in a pickle financially. Here are some of our options. It was, this is how we solve it. And I mean, that's been the nature of, debt and the approach to debt over the last 40 years is, well, we've got this asset, let's sell this asset and retire debt. Everyone hates debt. It's not palatable at all, this approach.
And what is the debt? Like, is the debt? Is it paper entries? What is it? It's the debt itself is confusing.
Well, it may even be the recognition that Racing New South Wales is holding them to ransom. I mean, I'm not sure of exactly the position of the ATC, but it does appear that they're under the pump, and they're seeing this as a lifeline.
And the prize money, Brenda will probably know more. Who actually sets prize money? Is it Racing New South Wales or is it the ATC? Who sets the prize money?
It's a negotiation between the two. The base prize money is set through it, but Racing New South Wales, some races are owned by Racing New South Wales. So the Everest and Golden Eagle are effectively owned by Racing New South Wales, and sort of effectively the funding flows through from them, depending on what they think it should be. So yeah, there's not a lot of clarity around that process and how that works. And I think that's really an important aspect as well. What do the clubs do? Do they turn on the Bay Maries and go home? Or do they actually help run racing? And that probably speaks to the broader challenge around where racing sits. Do they actually have a role within the racing aspect of what they're trying to create here? Because it seems like that's probably not the case. And that being the case, it's not really the best functional model, is it?
But it's a great opportunity because, but by accident, the ATC have caused this kerfuffle, and various parties have jumped in, and the spotlight is on. Yeah, exactly.
I think the biggest surprise out of the inquiry for me was to hear Hamish Esplin, who's head of the Thoroughbred Breeders New South Wales, and how disgruntled they are, because obviously races that you've mentioned, races that you mentioned like the Everest and the Golden Eagle, Silver Eagle, the Little Dance, Big Dance, all the dances or whatever they are, they're affecting the breeder pattern. So there's a knock-on effect to those, and
it was amazing when
I think the breeders' concern, or Hamish's concern particularly, is just about the lack of consultation about this stuff, and about this sort of understanding that these are industries that work side by side. I fundamentally believe that too. You need to work with the industries as they sit within. I think that's part of the breeder concern. The pattern is a broader challenge as well, and it sits and some of the national dysfunction with going on with racing. But I think the breeders have every right to be annoyed about this, because a lot of the decisions that have been made, if they're being shut out or being what Hamish Esplin suggested happened, was they were punished for speaking out. Now, he said that we don't have the proof of that, but he said that they were punished for speaking out through a Bob's bonus program being discontinued. That's a significant concern as well, and worthy of not just political inquiry, but inquiry into the way that racing's set up.
And most of the people that have spoken out, Gay's in a position of of power, really. Like she's pretty much untouchable. John O'Shea put it on the line. Kudos to him. And then the rest were basically David Hall's in a position I don't think he really cares. He cares about the industry and just wanted to put his opinion out there.
Hamish is in a position.
Hamish was like, well, they can't take anything more from me. He basically said the only thing they could take is the pattern, and they've already taken whatever they could. So it's just sort of either a position of power, sick of seeing what's going on, or just complete frustration that people are coming out. And you can only imagine that it's sparking a lot. Like how many people like us would have watched it, had issues that they sort of half wanted to raise. First thing they do is look up who can I contact to share my story. I'm sure that's happened in big numbers.
So, Marc, I'll direct this question to you again, because I'm not sure I've got the right answer, or not the right answer, but I just don't think you answered the question as
To your
a sort
satisfaction.
Well, to my satisfaction, and got a concrete answer.
Hey,
out of you.
you got. Is that a PVL hat you've got on there from Nick's perspective? I didn't
No,
know.
I don't mind which position he takes on this, but I just want to get clarity around it. So, do you think the full sale of Rosehill is in the best interest of racing long term?
Not at all. I mean, it's the sale of an asset. As Rob says, we need to look at actually recurring funding. So, I mean, there's no doubt that selling an asset, in my mind, is the wrong way to go about it. But I'm now starting to see it as a bit of a red herring. The bigger picture is the Act was brought in 1996 for the purposes of shifting the regulation of racing away from the AJC, and that was basically in response to the fact that the AJC was seen as untouchable and all-powerful. And whilst Thoroughbred New South Wales, which became Racing New South Wales, operated in a similar fashion, with the High Court case and the ability to exact revenue from the budding corporate sphere, and ultimately also the government getting in on the act with the POC and Racing New South Wales having a seat at the table as far as the government is concerned. We've seen a dramatic shift such that could not have been envisaged by the writers of the Act in the first place, some nearly 30 years ago. So it's really time to sit down and say, this power structure needs a revision.
Pretty simple. Like that's it. That's it. You've just given the little brother all the money and all the power in doing so.
Bren, I'll pose that question to you because I'm just aware of the clock here. But do you think the full sale of Rosehill's in the best interest of racing long term?
I think all those issues that Marc raised are fundamental before you make that decision. Before you get to a point, you've got to work out where the power structure sits within New South Wales racing and why that's important. Then you can work through that. If the mathematics work out, if there a price which racing could get from this, which would secure its future, is it $30 billion? I'm not saying that they could get that, but I'm saying, is there a point where you sit there and go, of course, all assets, if they're highly valued and overvalued depending on what you get out of it, you're right to consider that. The challenge is, what's the maths? The challenge is, how do we sit down and work it out to go, the ATC's never run a development to this level before. How can we know that their $5 billion calculation is going to be able to become true and be realised? And as I said, we're all well familiar with plenty of places we've seen. I live in Hobart. I go and look at that enormous grandstand at Albion Racecourse. I went there on the weekend. There was like 6 people in it. Built effectively by money derived out of the Tasmanian tote. We've seen money wasted before. How do we make sure that A, the money's not wasted again, and B, the money exists in the first place? People need to be informed to make decisions. Hopefully get to a point where the ATC membership can make an informed decision based upon the information they've got. But I think there's only a point where it makes sense. There's a monetary value where it makes sense, where it secures the future of racing. That's the point where it tips over. But from a philosophical point of view, I'm vehemently opposed to it because I think racing belongs where the population lives. And I think if it doesn't do that, in 20 or 30 years' time, it's going to be an irrelevance. It's going to be something that happens on the edge of town. It's going to be harness racing.
And it has to command a bigger price because of that, hasn't it? So I say the number's $5 billion, which I think it should be north of that. If it's 10, it should be 20. The number has to be astronomical and solve all of the world's problems, and there has to be a master plan and all of that before
but how
it's
do you
even
put
considered.
A price on iconography? I mean, this is even if you were offered an astronomical amount of money, I think that racing has to honour its past in some way, and that's very problematic in this particular situation.
And it is completely irreplaceable, no matter where they put it.
I agree completely. Yeah. Well, in Victoria, it's akin to selling Caulfield. I liken it to that, and the tradition, the history with the Melbourne Cup and Caulfield, that's what Racing New South Wales has done for the last 7 years. They've poured all this endless amounts of money into pumping up the Everest and creating these new races, the Golden Eagle, to create this like new brand of history.
My whole life in racing.
They'd love to have what Victoria have with the Melbourne Cup, Cox Plate and Caulfield Cup, and they're trying to emulate that. and there's no ROI to show whether what they've been doing in the last 7 years or however long.
Probably
Too
soon to tell.
Well, it's too soon to tell, but it just seems to fly in the face of that if you're going to go off and kill the track that's been around for 140 years and that's got the Golden Slipper, the Golden Rose, and all that history already established.
It's probably, in my life in racing, it's been the showcase race that any non-racing person assigns to racing in New South Wales.
It's the
Golden
famous
Slipper.
Sydney race. I mean, that's as much as I personally love the Doncaster.
Me too.
The Golden Slipper is the famous Sydney race, and it actually hasn't been around that long.
Yeah.
I think the broader challenge is to bring back to a sort of philosophical argument. I have this issue with racing for a long time. It constantly is chasing the audience it wants, not the audience it needs.
Mm-hmm.
And if you continue to concentrate racing in certain areas, the east versus west divide's clear in Sydney, right? You focus on Randwick, you move away from Rosehill. Well, that's fine, but what have you got in Randwick longer term? And what do you do with the rest? You've got Warwick Farm and Canterbury kind of there. You've got a nebulous track that might exist somewhere.
Well, they've been disenfranchised, Warwick Farm and Canterbury.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up through lots of Saturday racing at Warwick Farm and Canterbury, and there was no issue.
Well, the very first draft of the press release, Mark, the very, very first, we saw this through the standing order papers, right, which was, I think it was mid-November when they first drafted the press release, was like, Warwick Farm is going to become Sydney's second track. It said that. Something happened in the 2 weeks between then and there, which said, no, Warwick Farm's not that track. We don't want Warwick Farm to be that track, and they moved away from that. And I think, the people of Western Sydney can feel rightly disenfranchised. As much as the people of South East Melbourne can feel rightly disenfranchised if Sandown gets shut down. Yeah, they've got Cranbourne and Pakenham, but it's not quite the same, is it? So I think that there's this notion of racing continually chasing the high mighty, high wealth, this is what racing we want it to be and what it needs to be, which is the day-to-day, people running the sport, people driving the sport, high engagement, broader engagement where it sits. If it does that, it'll paint itself into a corner, in my opinion.
It could also be argued that, of course, racing has no clue about their actual customers because they've given...
I don't know them. Yeah.
Well, they've given that facility completely over to private enterprise. So our corporate bookmaking leviathans are basically responsible for attracting people to racing.
100%. Nail on the head. And they're getting taxed to oblivion.
Not just tax. If it comes out that they can't publicly market anymore through sporting or social media outlets, what happens then?
Yeah, as you say, it's on a knife edge.
You're putting all your eggs in one basket.
And to be honest, that could change the game again because then all of a sudden the only place you can market is at the racetrack. So that could completely change course of the way things operate as well, and that could see another revolution within
it's an opportunity anyway.
Served. Yeah.
But the argument is racing shouldn't be arguing with itself in inquiries. It should be beating a door to Canberra. Is it doing that? Is it representing itself amongst what would be the most significant decision in terms of its future for a very long time? The decisions are being made now. The next 6 months will determine what goes on with that. All right. And that's a really crucial part. That's a federal government inquiry into the advertising promotion of gambling. That'll be a significant thing.
We've seen no leadership from the regulators in terms of the customer-facing experience. So we've allowed the Leviathans to market racing their way. The public and the federal government on their behalf have seen an issue with that, and yet the regulator has been relatively silent. I mean, they say, well, it's not us. But of course, we are responsible for how racing is perceived.
Absolutely.
Yep. Bren, when's the next sitting for the parliamentary inquiry?
August 9, box office. That'll be Peter V'landys will be at that
Friday week.
Friday week. Peter, put in your diaries. Peter V'landys will be at that hearing from all the reports that I'm hearing. He'll have a little bit of a chat with them beforehand about a couple of things that were raised in the first. That will be in camera, so it won't be actually broadcast. But there were a few aspects which were raised, which Peter V'landys has told the straight. He's determined to set the record straight on a few things. He will also appear before and answer it. Now, you talk about box office. If Marc Latham talks as much trash about Peter V'landys to his face as he has under parliamentary privilege before, it could be a very interesting few hours. But no doubt, this whole stuff we'll talk about around the power base of Racing New South Wales we talked about. This is before we even get to the ATC. This is the remarkable thing about this inquiry. This is supposed to be about the ATC. Peter O'Brien hasn't received an invite yet. He'll no doubt get it for the next one, which is in sort of September. But yeah, it changes the way it's fascinating how it's evolved the way it had. But yeah, so that Friday week will be the day we're all sitting down and looking at our streams, or I'll be anyway, and providing hopefully a bit of analysis about what that means. And I don't expect Peter V'landys will be a wallflower on this. I'm expecting him to come back hard on this. He's very determined to show that how he was being represented so far in this inquiry and the broader discussion about this is not actually the truth. So I'll be interested to see how that pans out.
Never underestimate PVL.
True that. But the most incredible thing, and I think it might have been through Bren posting a link, clicking on it, the liberation from someone who's sort of been a part of, asked a lot of questions and never been given an answer, always been worried about that word that was used so much, transparency, and being able to sit there live and listen to people asking questions that you knew were going to have to be then answered down the line was so liberating. And hopefully that's, whether Peter's got the answer or what, we need a leader, whoever it is. It's just good to hear those questions sort of being putting out there and someone having to actually answer them on record.
Yeah, and I think it'll be great to hear Peter speak next Friday, because whenever there's been submissions or questions asked, the door gets just slammed in your face, and
that's it.
That's from bookmakers, invitations from other press and things like that.
You see, it's not everyone. It's the breeders. You hear it, Hamish. Everybody sort of is met at some point with that stone wall. So hopefully this knocks a few of them down.
Look forward to it. Marc, Lambourne, any final thoughts before we let you go?
No, thanks for the opportunity to come on, and of course, Brent is he's the man with the insight. He's very, very key to this whole situation, and I've been privileged to be a part of this panel. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Marc. Good luck, and Bren, any final thoughts, or where can the punters find you at the Straight? X,
go to straight.com.au. We've got a Rosehill section there, which has got, I think, 48 articles I've written over the last 6 months, which have exhausted my ability to keep writing about it. Look, we've made this our pride point. This is our ability to really show people what our value is. We don't take a view on Rosehill. We don't take a view on Racing New South Wales. We report. I might write the occasional column here or there, but I think people aren't here from my point of view. They're here to know what's being spoken about and why these things are important. So I urge people to check out what we're doing. If you're not getting what you want from the major media outlets, are not getting the coverage.
When you're not getting what you want,
well, come to us. We're the ones that will be providing that. Yeah, we've got enshrined in what we're doing as an aspect of independence. It requires sometimes speaking a bit of truth and talking about things that people aren't necessarily comfortable about, but racing needs to look itself in the mirror, and we're hopefully trying to provide a part of that. And I think that's what the Straight's doing. So go to thestraight.com.au. It's all there.
And I agree. Your sense of time in launch was incredible, because imagine what it would be
had we not known.
Like your point at racing.com, crickets, So like if they're not going to report on it, no one in New South Wales obviously is. If someone like you's not doing it, like no one's going to hear about it. So it's
nine, just Fairfax/9 didn't cover it either. News Corp covered a little bit, Mike, with a positive spin about from Chris Minns. That's fine. Everyone's got to make their bed and work as a media outlet. That's fine. But our point of difference is that we'll talk about these things. And if people like that, they'll come to us. And look, I'll tell you, it was our biggest day of traffic ever last Tuesday. We've never seen so much interest in this story. People are clearly interested in this story, and we're going to keep covering it.
Yep. Friday week might set a new record.
I would have thought so. Yeah, well, independent news and reporting such as Bren provides on the Straight is absolutely paramount to making sure the industry runs smoothly. So big hat tip from us. We've got no affiliation whatsoever with the Straight, but it's just good to hear all sides of the story, as sort of Bren suggests. And that's my, I guess, big worry at the moment for the last sort of, I'd say, 5 years. The level of censorship in racing media is definitely going the wrong way. So it's a welcome surprise to have someone
censorship, right? They're the two big things. That's the only thing we fight for.
100%. We just want the industry to be great, just not only for ourselves, but obviously our kids and future generations. And it's thrived for the last 140 years at Rosehill. And fingers crossed, New South Wales can navigate itself into a better position, because it does feel like the imbalance is definitely out at the moment. But thought was some great points made by all panelists, and I think I'm really happy, and I've got a better understanding. And hopefully, you guys, if you've got through the hour or so, you understand the situation a lot more clearly now. So Big thanks to all our panel, as I said before, and we'll see you next week for the resumption of Bet Doctor on Thursday to preview the real racing, and Spring Carnival will be back on our doorstep. Thanks, guys.